Thank you, Mr. Hegseth. I'm looking forward to this opportunity to talk. I want to return to the incident that you referenced a minute ago that occurred in Monterey, California in October 2017. At that time, you were still married to your second wife, correct?
I believe so.
And you had just fathered a child by a woman who would later become your third wife, correct?
Senator, I was falsely charged, fully investigated, and completely cleared.
So you think you were completely cleared because you committed no crime. That's your definition of cleared? You had just fathered a child 2 months before by a woman that was not your wife. I am shocked that you would stand here and say you're completely cleared. Can you so casually cheat on a second wife and cheat on the mother of a child that had been born 2 months before, and you tell us you are completely cleared?
Senator,
how is that a complete clear?
Senator, her child's name is Gwendolyn Hope Hegseth, and she's a child of God, and she's 7 years old.
And she was, and you cheated on the mother of that child less than 2 months after that daughter was born, didn't you?
Those were false charges.
Well,
it was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared. And I am so grateful for the marriage I have to this amazing woman behind me.
You've admitted that you had sex at that hotel in October 2017. You said it was consensual, isn't that correct?
Anything?
You've admitted that it was consensual, and you were still married, and you just had a child by another woman.
Again,
how do you explain your judgment?
Completely false charges against me.
You
fully investigated, and I was completely clear.
You have admitted that you had sex while you were married to wife 2 after you just had fathered a child by wife 3. You've admitted that. Now, if it had been a sexual assault, that would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, wouldn't it?
It was a false claim then and a false claim now.
If it had been a sexual assault, that would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, wouldn't it?
That was a false claim.
So you're
talking about a hypothetical.
So you can't tell me whether someone who has committed a sexual assault is disqualified from being Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I know in my instance, and I'm talking about my instance only, it was a false claim.
But you acknowledge, that you cheated on your wife and that you cheated on the woman by whom you had just fathered a child. You have admitted that.
I will allow your words to speak for themselves.
You're not retracting that today. That's good. I assume that in each of your weddings, you've pledged to be faithful to your wife. You've taken an oath to do that, haven't you?
Senator, as I've acknowledged to everyone in this committee, I'm not a perfect person, not claiming to be.
But no, I just asked a simple question. You've taken an oath like you would take an oath to be Secretary of Defense in all of your weddings to be faithful to your wife. Is that correct?
I have failed in things in my life, and thankfully I'm redeemed by my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
In finalizing divorces from your first and second wives, were there non-disclosure agreements in connection with those divorces?
Senator, not that I'm aware of.
If there were, would you agree to release those first and second wives from any confidentiality agreement?
Senator, it's not something I'm aware of.
But if there were, you would agree to release them from a confidentiality agreement?
Senator, that's not my responsibility.
Did you ever engage in any acts of physical violence against any of your wives?
Senator, absolutely not.
But you would agree with me that if someone had committed physical violence against a spouse, that would be disqualifying to serve as Secretary of Defense, correct?
Senator, absolutely not have I ever done that.
You would agree that that would be a disqualifying offense, would you not?
Senator, you're talking about a hypothetical.
I don't think it's a hypothetical. Violence against spouses occurs every day. And if you as a leader are not capable of saying that physical violence against a spouse should be a disqualifying fact for being Secretary of the most powerful nation in the world, you're demonstrating an astonishing lack of judgment. The incident in Monterey led to a criminal charge, a criminal investigation, a private settlement, and a cash payment to the woman who filed the complaint. And there was also a non-disclosure agreement, correct?
It was a confidential settlement agreement off of a nuisance lawsuit.
Right. During an interview, you claimed that you settled the matter because you were worried that if it became public, it might hurt your career. Do you maintain that you were blackmailed?
Senator, I maintain that false claims were made against me. And ultimately,
your attorney
those
used
false
the
claims,
frame.
I have the opportunity to attest my innocence in those false claims.
But you didn't reveal any of this to President Trump or the transition team as they were considering you to be nominated for Secretary of Defense. You didn't reveal the action. You didn't reveal the criminal complaint. You didn't reveal the criminal investigation. You didn't reveal the settlement. You didn't reveal the cash payment. Why didn't you inform the commander-in-chief and the transition team of this very relevant event?
Senator, I've appreciated every part of the process with the transition team. They have been open and honest with me. We've had great conversations between the two of us, and I appreciate the opportunity that President-elect Trump has given me.
You chose not to reveal this, right? Because you knew it would hurt your chances. So you chose not to reveal this really important thing to the commander-in-chief and the transition team because you were worried about your chances rather than trying to be candid with the future president of the United States. Are there any other important facts that you chose not to reveal to the president-elect and his team as they were considering you to be Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I sit here before you an open book, as everyone who's watched this process.
With multiple non-disclosure and confidentiality agreements tying the hands of many people who would like to comment to us. Much has been made of your workplace behavior as a leader of nonprofit veterans organizations and as a Fox News contributor. Were you fired from either of the leadership positions with the nonprofits?
I was the leader. I was the CEO of Concerned Veterans for America and the executive director of Vets for Freedom.
Were you fired from either of them?
And I was never fired from a veterans organization.
Do you have non-disclosure agreements with either of those organizations?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator.
Many of your work colleagues have said that you show up for work under the influence of alcohol or drunk. I know you've denied that, but you would agree with me, right, that if that was the case, that would be disqualifying for somebody to be Secretary of Defense.
Senator, those are all anonymous false claims, and the totality
they're not anonymous.
The letters on the record here.
They're not anonymous.
On the record, people
we've seen records with names
Vets
attached
for Freedom,
to them.
Concerned Vets for America, and Fox News attributing to me working hard every day on behalf of
one of your
mission.
colleagues said that you got drunk at an event at a bar and chanted, "Kill all Muslims." Another colleague, not anonymous, we have this, said that you took co-workers to a strip club. You were drunk, you tried to dance with strippers, you had to be held off the stage, and one of your employees in that event filed a sexual harassment charge as a result of it. Now, I know you denied these things, but isn't that the kind of behavior that, if true, would be disqualifying for somebody to be Secretary of Defense?
Senator, anonymous false charges.
They're not anonymous. And I'll just conclude and say this to the chairman. You claim that this was all anonymous. We have seen records with names attached to all of these, including the name of your own mother. So don't make this into some anonymous press thing. We have seen multiple names of colleagues consistently throughout your career that have talked about your abusive actions,
Chairman, I think he's over his time. He's way over his time.
I now yield.
And thank you very much. I now ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a family court order concerning the appointment of parenting time between Mr. Hegseth and Mrs. Samantha Hegseth. It states that there were no claims of domestic abuse or probable evidence of abuse in the relationship. Without objection, that will be added to the record. And we now move to Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hegseth, for your service, for your willingness to endure this. And I'm sorry for what has been happening to you, particularly the very idea that you should have to sit there and answer hypothetical potential in somebody's imagination crimes that may take place at some point, and wouldn't that disqualify you if you were a murderer or if you were a rapist? Unfair, and I'm embarrassed for this behavior. But first, I want to say thank you for your strong proclamation, unapologetic proclamation of faith in Jesus Christ. I sat here and listened to your opening statement and thought, wow, this is a guy who in today's culture is willing to stand up and say the first thing is first, faith in Jesus Christ. And I was reminded of what Christ said in Matthew, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and these things shall be added unto you. You are going to have a great future as our secretary, and I look forward to that day happening. I also want to get back to, you mentioned, and it got rather dismissed quickly, pivoted, as a lot of things do. You'd mentioned that you were not able to serve with your National Guard unit in the protection of the inauguration of Joe Biden because of a tattoo, a Christian tattoo. Can you elaborate just a little bit on what is this very offensive, extremist, racist tattoo that you have?
It's a tattoo I have right here, Senator. It's called the Jerusalem Cross. It's a historic Christian symbol. In fact, interestingly, recently I attended briefly the memorial ceremony of former President Jimmy Carter. On the floor of our National Cathedral, on the front page of his program, was the very same Jerusalem Cross. It is a Christian religious symbol. And when the events happened before preceding the Biden inauguration, I was a part of the mobilization to defend that inauguration as someone who'd been a proud supporter of Donald Trump, but also a member of the military, had orders to come to Washington, D.C. to guard that inauguration. And at the last minute, those orders were revoked. I'd never had orders revoked before. I'd been on orders to a lot of places to do a lot of difficult and dangerous things. They were revoked, and I was not told why. Later, when I wrote my book, I was able to get information. It was because I had been identified. Someone who'd served in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Guantanamo Bay, holding a riot shield outside the White House. I'd been identified as an extremist, as someone unworthy of guarding the inauguration of an incoming American president. And if that's happening to me, Senator, how many other men and women, how many other patriots, how many other people of conscience? We haven't even talked about COVID and the tens of thousands of service members who were kicked out because of an experimental vaccine. In President Trump's Defense Department, they will be apologized to, they will be reinstituted with pay and rank. Things like focusing on extremism, Senator, have created a climate inside our ranks that feel political when it hasn't ever been political. Those are the types of things that are going to change. And Senator Sullivan, you mentioned that study. After a whole study was held, extremism working group study, 100 extremists were identified in the ranks of 3 million. And most of those were gang-related. So it was a made-up boogeyman to begin with.
You, Mr. Haigseth, are not the extremist. The people who would deny you your expression of faith are the extremists. They're the racists. They're the bigots. You're the one that is protecting their right to be one. Thank you for that. I want to go to another point in your opening statement, and it's summarized in this beautiful one-sentence paragraph. You said, quote, "Leaders at all levels will be held accountable, and warfighting and lethality and the readiness of the troops and their families will be our only focus." At that moment, in my mind's eye, I heard soldiers, airmen, Marines, sailors, guardians from the Pentagon to the Pacific and everywhere in between applaud. Applaud. And they're thinking, it's about time. I can get on board with that idea. And quite honestly, and I want to get to this because I think it's so important. I would say, I don't know, just about maybe everyone, I'm trying to think of an exception to this, that wears the uniform that has ever come before this committee or that I've met with privately, publicly, that I've been on tours with, that I've traveled with, that wear the uniform, whether it's with 4 stars or no stars, agrees with that statement. And I just want to caution you, and I'd be interested in your feedback on this. You know, there's been a lot of talk about firing woke generals, creating the purge group, and all those things you and I have talked about. I would say give those men and women a chance under new leadership. You know, my favorite painting in the rotunda is of George Washington retiring his commission, establishing on day one, a man who could have been king, chose to be a civilian leader of this country. And I just would encourage you to trust them first, and look forward to them saluting the civilian leadership of this country. So just maybe if you could spend a minute just elaborating a little bit about the wokeness, where it comes from, and who will be held accountable.
The wokeness comes not from the uniform ranked, Senator, but from the political class. On day one, on January 20th, when President Trump is sworn in, he will issue a new set of lawful orders. And the leadership of our services will have an opportunity to follow those lawful orders or not. Those lawful orders will not be based on politics. They will be based on readiness, accountability, standards, and lethality. That is the process by which leaders will be judged. And accountability is coming, because everybody in this room knows if you're a rifleman and you lose your rifle, they're throwing the book at you. But if you're a general who loses a war, you get a promotion. That's not going to happen in Donald Trump's Pentagon. There will be real standards for success. Everyone from the top, from the most senior general to the most lowly private, will ensure that they're treated fairly, men and women, inside that system.
I also just want to commend you for your answers to Senator Fisher's questions about nuclear deterrence, but I also appreciate the fact that you emphasize reputational deterrence, because deterrence is not a weapon system, it is an attitude, and you project an attitude of deterrence. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kramer. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hessick, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Senator.
You've made several references to your religion today. I share that devotion to Christianity, but I must say I've been reminded somewhat of Saul on his way to Damascus. You seem to have been converted over the last several weeks and several months. You wrote in your book just last year that, but if we're going to, this is the book, War on Warriors, but if we're going to send our boys to fight, and it should be boys, we need to unleash them to win. Later on, our boys should not fight by rules written by dignified men. Which is it? Is it only boys can fight? I mean, you've testified here today that you believe in women in combat, but you didn't just last year. How do you explain your conversion?
Senator, my testimony is clear. Writing a book is different than being Secretary of Defense, and I look forward to leading the men and women of our military. And my comment there, Senator, was about the burdensome rules of engagement that members of our generation, men and women, have seen on the battlefield. And one thing President Trump changed in meaningful ways that led to meaningful developments on the battlefield. When President Trump took control in the first term, ISIS was raging across Iraq. And as someone who spent a lot of time there with other men and women who invested in that mission, it was a very difficult moment to see the black flag of ISIS fly. And what President Trump did was untie the hands of warfighters. He changed the rules of engagement, untied the hands of warfighters, and allowed them to complete their mission and crush ISIS. It has not just tactical implications, operational and strategic implications, how you allow warfighters to go about winning and fighting their wars. President Trump understands that, and within the laws of war and the Uniform Code of Military Justice, we are going to unleash warfighters to win wars so that wars don't drag on forever, as our generation has seen.
So are you rejecting Title 18 and Title 42, I think, also has provisions that incorporate the Geneva Convention and the laws of armed combat? Are you saying that those laws should be repealed? That is the law of the land right now.
Senator, we have laws on the books from the Geneva Conventions into the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and then underneath that you have layers in which standard or temporary rules of engagement are put into place. We fight enemies also, Senator, as our generation understands, that play by no rules. They use civilians as human shields.
So are you saying
they target
that
women and children?
The Geneva Convention should not be observed?
We follow rules. We follow rules, but we don't need burdensome rules of engagement that make it impossible for us to win these wars.
You're saying two different things. You're saying we follow rules, but we don't have to follow the rules in all cases. Is that correct?
Senator,
I'm
making an important tactical distinction that warfighters will understand. That there are the rules we swear an oath to defend, which are incredibly important, and this committee understands and helps set them. And then there are those echelons above reality, from, corps to division to brigade to battalion, and by the time it trickles down to a company or a platoon or a squad level, you have a rules of engagement that nobody recognizes. And then it makes you incredibly difficult to actually do your job on the battlefield. That's the kind of assessment and look that an Army major will give to this process if I was confirmed to be the Secretary of Defense.
Your quote is,
true understanding of that.
Your quote in 2024, our boys should not fight by rules written by dignified men in mahogany rooms 80 years ago. That would be the Geneva Convention. America should fight by its own rules, and we should fight to win or not go in at all. are you saying that the Geneva Convention provisions, which clearly outlaw torture of prisoners, should not apply in the future?
Senator, how we treat our wounded, how we treat our prisoners, the applications of the Geneva Conventions are incredibly important. But we would all have to acknowledge that the way we fought our wars back when the Geneva Conventions were written are a lot different than the asymmetric, non-conventional environment of counterinsurgency that I confronted in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was the senior counterinsurgency instructor in Afghanistan. My job was to understand how the Taliban and al-Qaeda operated so that NATO units coming in could be informed of what was happening. They knew our rules of engagement, and when they were more restrictive, they took advantage of them, and it put our men and women in a more dangerous and difficult place.
And you believe
For
that
future wars we fight, we need to have someone atop the Pentagon, sir, who understands how those ripple effects
Well, I just want
impact
to
the men and women
understand
in
your
uniform.
position. Your position is torture's okay. Is that correct? Waterboarding, torture is no longer prohibited given the circumstances of whatever war we're in. Is that correct?
Senator, that is not what I said. I've never been party to torture. We are a country that fights by the rule of law, and our men and women always do. And yet we have too many people here in air-conditioned offices that like to point fingers at the guys in dark and dangerous places, the gals in helicopters in enemy territory who are doing things that people in Washington, D.C. would never dare to do, or send, in many cases.
In one of your interviews, you said they're willing to do this. You're talking about Donald Trump and Senator Cruz. They're willing to do something like waterboarding if it's going to keep us safe. Are you okay with waterboarding?
Senator, the law of the land is that waterboarding is not legal.
So the statement that you made, you now recant. Is that correct? They are willing to do something like waterboarding if it's going to keep us safe. You expressed that with approval.
Senator, I'm very familiar with that as a concept, having spent a year at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, guarding 700 of those that attacked us on 9/11.
I just want to be clear. Are we going to abide by the Geneva Convention and the prohibitions on torture, or are we not? Is it going to
Senator,
depend on the circumstances?
As I've stated multiple times, the Geneva Conventions are what we base ours, but what an American first national security policy is not going to do is hand its prerogatives over to international bodies that make decisions about how our men and women make decisions on the battlefield. America First understands we send Americans for a clear mission and a clear objective. We equip them properly for that objective.
Right,
we give them everything they need, and then we stand behind them with the rules of engagement that allow them to fight decisively to defeat America's enemies, which is why we say
I just have a few
quietly
seconds left, Mr. Husbeck, if you could. I was very disturbed in your opening statement where you talked about the priorities that you have. We will work with our partners and allies to deter aggression in the Indo-Pacific from the communist Chinese. There's not a single mention in this statement about Ukraine or Russia. Is this code for we're going to abandon Ukraine?
Senator, the president, that's a presidential level policy decision. He's made it very clear that he would like to see a end to that conflict. We know who the aggressor is. We know who the good guy is. We'd like to see it as advantageous for the Ukrainians as possible, but that war needs to come to an end.
You talk a lot about deterrence of China. I would submit that Xi Jinping is watching what we do very carefully. If we abandon Ukraine, that would be the strongest signal possible to Xi Jinping that he can take Taiwan without significant resistance from this country.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Scott of Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record 2 letters which testify to Mr. Hegseth's leadership record at Concerned Veterans for America. The first letter submitted by Mr. Darren Selnick, a senior advisor at CFA, stated that there's been no better leader, policy champion, or fighter for the military and veterans than Pete. He was instrumental in 2014 and 2017 in ensuring that veterans had health care choice. The second letter submitted by Mr. Kaysen Spiro, Digital Media Director of CVA from 2015 to 2017, stated, Pete brought incredible energy, focus, and a clear vision to the organization and showed everything that the team accomplished together.
And I similarly asked to submit to the record a letter from Paul J. Roberts, retired Colonel, U.S. Army Special Forces, speaking to the unwavering integrity of Mr. Hegseth. Is there objection? Without objection, those 3 will be admitted. Senator Scott.
All right. First, congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you, Senator.
And thank you for being willing to serve our nation. I served in the Navy. I'm really proud of my dad. He was crazy. He did all 4 combat jumps with the 82nd Airborne. He, after that, survived all that and fought in the Battle of the Bulge. And what they went through, it was hell. So I have a lot of respect for him and for everybody that puts on the uniform and serves in battle and has to lead people in battle. Because being on a ship, that didn't happen to me, but I had a lot of friends that happened to, and it clearly happened to my dad. I've served on this committee for 6 years, 2 years under President Trump and the past 4 under President Joe Biden. I've seen how the Biden-Harris administration pushed the DOD to prioritize wokeness over being the most lethal military force in the world. It's our readiness, our national security, and our ability to recruit people who are willing to put their lives on the line for our country. Can you talk about some of the changes we can make to improve recruitment and rebuild our military into the most lethal force in the world?
First of all, Senator, thank you for the question. Thank you for your time. I think the first and most important thing we could have done is elect Donald Trump as the new commander-in-chief, because past is prologue. Our warfighters understand what kind of commander-in-chief they're going to get in President Donald Trump, someone who stands behind them, someone who gives them clear missions, someone who ends wars decisively, and the issue of Ukraine was mentioned, and ensures new wars are not started. There was a minor incursion under Barack Obama into Crimea, followed by nothing under President Trump, followed by an all-out assault by Vladimir Putin into Ukraine under the Biden administration. That did not happen under Donald Trump. Donald Trump managed the Taliban. Under the Biden administration, Afghanistan collapsed tragically, ending in the lives of 13 at Abbey Gate, who we remember every single day, and no one was held accountable for that. Chinese spy balloons were flying over the country. None of that happened under Donald Trump, and our warfighters understand that. So there's no better recruiter, in my mind, for our military than President Donald Trump. My job is to come alongside him, should I be confirmed, and continue to emphasize his emphasis on warfighting, on getting anything that doesn't contribute to meritocracy out of how decisions are made inside the Pentagon. What gender you are, what race you are, your views on climate change, or whether you are a person of conscience and your faith should have no bearing on whether you get promoted or whether you're selected to go to West Point or whether you graduate from Ranger School. The only thing that should matter is how capable are you at your job? How excellent are you at your job? I served in multi-ethnic units in every place that I worked, every place that I served. None of that mattered. But suddenly we re-inject DEI and critical race theory, dividing troops into different categories, oppressor and oppressed, in ways that they otherwise just want to work together. That's why I've pointed out before, and I'll say it again, and because I'm sure it'll be quoted to me at some point. The dumbest phrase in military history is our unity is our strength. No, our shared purpose is our strength. Our shared mission is our strength. We are one DOD community of all committed to the same mission. Has nothing to do with your background. Has to do with what your commitment is to the country. And that is my solemn pledge to every single person that would put the uniform on and reflects President Trump's priorities as well, Senator.
Thank you. You know, we talked a little bit about the fact the Pentagon can't do an audit, all right? Can you talk about, and I mean, to me, I've run big businesses. It's all about accountability. If you want to get an audit done, you can get an audit done. You might get a letter saying there's things you have to fix, but it all goes to accountability, and we haven't had it. So can you talk about how you bring accountability to the table, what you've done in the past, and what you're going to do with regard to bringing accountability to the Pentagon?
I meant it when I said it in the opening statement, Senator. I know what I don't know. I know I've never run an organization of 3 million people with a budget of $850 billion. But what I do know is that I've led men and women. I've led people. And it's leadership of people and motivation of people and a clear vision of people where you build a team, cast that vision, empower people properly. I want smarter and more capable people around me than me. And you will get that at the department. I cast the clear vision, build the plan, work it, we set the metrics, and everyone is held accountable. I know our incoming businessman president believes in accountability and holding people accountable. That will happen at the Pentagon. I mean, this has been a problem for a long time. Secretary Rumsfeld gave a speech on September 10th, 2001 that's mostly forgotten. But it was about the need for acquisition reform, cutting tail to give to teeth to warfighters. And then 9/11 happened. And these are problems that have been persistent for a long time. But now we have new threats. And we need the urgency of this moment. As you said, Mr. Chairman, the most dangerous moment we've been since the end of the Cold War and possibly since World War II. The urgency to do everything possible to get the capabilities into the hands of warfighters, Emergency Powers Defense Production Act, whatever it takes, and an audit is certainly part of it.
Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to do this job? What drives you?
You have 30 seconds.
Because I love my country, Senator, and I've dedicated my life to the warfighters. People see me as someone who hosts a morning show on television. But people that really know me know where my heart's at. It's with the guys in this audience who've had my back, and I've had theirs. We've been in some of the darkest and most difficult places you can ever be in. You come back a different person. And only by the grace of God am I here before you today. I'm doing this job for them, for all of them.
Thank you,
for the
Mr.
president.
Hegseth. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Hegseth, thank you. Thank you for your service. So if you're confirmed as Secretary of Defense, you will oversee our military, including about 250,000 women who currently serve on active duty in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Space Forces, and the Marines. And I have serious concerns that your behavior toward women disqualifies you from serving in this role. Now, I've been trying to get answers from you for quite some time on this. You haven't wanted to meet or to answer any of my questions, so we'll just have to do it here and dive in. I want to pick up on some of the questions asked by Senators Shaheen and Gillibrand and Hirono, and I just want to make sure we have a list of some of the facts that I think are undisputed. I'm not going to talk about anonymous sources. I'm just going to quote you directly. We've got the video. We've got it in print. So going back to January 2013, you told a Fox News interviewer that women in the military simply couldn't measure up to men in the military, saying that allowing women to serve in combat roles would force the military to lower the bar. You picked up on that same theme in 2015, making remarks on Fox News, referring to women in combat as, quote, it would erode standards. June 2024, you said on Ben Shapiro's podcast, quote, women shouldn't be in combat at all. And then, of course, we've talked about it in 2024. You published a book, and you say on page 26 of your book, we need moms, but not in the military, especially in combat units. Page 48 of your book, you claim that women should not be in combat roles, because men are distracted by women. And then 10 weeks ago, you appeared on the Sean Ryan show and said, I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. Now, I presume you recall making all these statements?
Senator, I'm not familiar with the article you're pointing to in 2013, but it underscores my argument completely. Because in that 2013 argument, I was talking about standards.
No,
Standards are what it's always been about,
Senator. Let's not have this same fight again.
Always been about Senate
I've quoted
standards.
you directly. We've got the video. We're happy to show it. But I want to be clear here. For 12 years, you were quite open about your views, and your views were consistently the same. Women are inferior soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and guardians. And in case anyone missed the point, and these are your words from 10 weeks ago, women absolutely straight up should not be permitted to serve in combat. And I notice on each of these quotes, those are said without qualification. It's not by how much you can lift or how fast you can run. They don't belong in combat, period, or your words, straight up. And then on November 9th, 2024, just 32 days after your last public comment saying that women absolutely should not be in combat, you declared that, quote, some of our greatest warriors are women, and you support having them serve in combat. Now, that is a very, very big about face in a very, very short period of time. So help me understand, Mr. Hegseth, What extraordinary event happened in that 32-day period that made you change the core values you had expressed for the preceding 12 years?
Senator, again, I very much appreciate you bringing up my comments from 2013 because for me, this issue has always been about standards. And unfortunately, because of some of the people that have been in
Excuse
political
me, Mr.
power for the
Hegseth,
last 4
let's just stop.
priorities
Let's
other
just
than
stop
standards,
right there.
lethality, and
Mr.
meritocracy
Hegseth,
have
I'm
driven
quoting
decision-making.
I'm quoting you from the podcast. Women shouldn't be in combat at all. Where is the reference to standards? That they should be there if they can carry, if they can run? I don't see that at all, Mr. Hegseth. What I see is that there's a 32-day period in which you suddenly have another description about your views of women in the military. And I just want to know, what changed in the 32 days that the song you sang is not the song you come in here today to sing?
Senator, the concerns I have and the concerns that many have had, especially in ground combat units, is that in pursuit of certain percentages or quotas, standards have been changed. And that makes the combat more difficult
Let me make a
for everybody
suggestion
involved.
about what happened in that 32 days. You got a nomination from President Trump. Now, I've heard of deathbed conversions, but this is the first time I've heard of a nomination conversion. And I hope you understand that many women serving in the military right now might think that if you can convert so rapidly your long-held and aggressively pursued views in just 32 days, that 32 days after you get confirmed, maybe you'll just reverse those views and go back to the old guy who said straight up, women do not belong in combat. Now, Mr. Hegseth, you have written that after they retire, generals should be banned from working for the defense industry for 10 years. You and I agree on the corrosive effects of the revolving door between the Pentagon and defense contractors. It's something I would have liked to talk with you about if you'd come and been willing to visit with me. But the question I have for you on this is, will you put your money where your mouth is and agree that when you leave this job, you will not work for the defense industry for 10 years?
Senator, it's not even a question I've thought about because
You can
it's
think
not
about it
one
right
that,
now.
It's not one, my motivation for this job
I understand
has never
that. I
been
just
about
need
what
a
could
yes or no
conceivably
here.
come next.
Time is short. I just need a yes or no.
I would consult with the president about what the policy should be
In
at the Defense
other
Department.
words, you're quite sure that every general who serves should not go directly into the defense industry for 10 years, but you're not willing to make that same pledge?
I'm not a general, Senator.
You'll be the one, let us just be clear, in charge of the generals. So you're saying sauce for the goose, but certainly not sauce for the gander?
I would want to see what the policy of the
Oh,
president
I'll
is.
bet you would.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for your hard work and your committee's hard work, Mr. Chairman. This has gone well. I'd like to submit this letter, topic Conduct at Vets for Freedom for Hegseth. I'd like to submit that for the record, please.
Without objection.
Mr. Hegseth, thanks for being here today and with your family. I know this is tough. That's what it's all about, though. You're a tough guy. Been here for a while. Never seen this many people that here for a support of a nominee. That's impressive. I met with a lot of them yesterday, and they are very passionate. So thank you for willing to take this on, and congratulations on your nomination. I'm worried about recruiting. I mean, we can look at everything out there and talk about all these things, these narratives, but at the end of the day, I came from a team sport where the players actually won the games. And that's what's going to happen here. You're not going to win the game. Now, you're going to set the precedent. You're going to get the blame or the credit, but there's going to be people that's going to be under you that's going to set the precedent for the future of our country. Now, the war games that we play on our computers with our adversaries right now, for us, it don't look good because our military, we're in trouble. Our whole country's in trouble. Thank God President Trump got elected November the 5th. We couldn't have kept down this same path. We could not, that could not happen. I met with a couple of generals this summer. Coach, we're spending more money on transgender restrooms than we are coverings for $100 million airplanes. That's not acceptable. We can't do that. That's not what this is about. Met with a couple of Navy SEALs not too long ago. They just got back from crawling around in the mud and the muck, overseas, unknown places. Couldn't tell you where they've been, carrying a weapon, obviously protecting us and our allies. And the first week they're back, what'd they do? They had to go through a week of DEI training. Both are now out. They give it up. It was embarrassing to them of what they had to do. We've lost all sight of what we're doing in our military, lost all sight. It starts with leadership, and it starts with recruiting. Well, when a young man used to, when I was growing up, if you couldn't afford to go to college, you had the opportunity to go to the military where you could learn a trade. You could learn, you could make a living for your family, and eventually possibly get an education. That was a good alternative. We've forgotten that. We've forgotten it. We can't give up on our young people. Young people are our number one commodity in this country, and they're the ones that's going to live and die for the freedom of this country in the future. So, again, thank you for taking this on. Recruiting. Our service academies are meant to serve as our primary commissioning source of officers. It now appears that they are a breeding ground for leftist activists and champions of DEI and critical theory. Now, not all, but some, and some is way too much. How are we going to eliminate this, Mr. Exton? How are we going to get this back on track to where we grow our leaders? I had a young man that forever he wanted to go to West Point. I got him a nomination, I got him accepted, and he turned it down. He says, Coach, I'm not getting involved with that mess. How are we going to overcome this?
Senator, thank you for the question. And I think it comes down to leadership, clear leadership. From President Trump through me, should I be nominated? And that's what soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians see, is clear leadership. It says, this is what we believe. This is the mission we're going to give you. Here's the equipment we're going to give you, and here's how we're going to support you. Because the military, at a lot of levels, Senator, has been for generations a family business. You know, my grandfather served, my father served, I served, my daughter served. That chain has started to break with generations of people my age and older talking to their kids and grandkids, wondering, pondering, do I want them to serve? Will my country use them responsibly? When that kind of doubt is cast, you get serious recruiting problems like we do right now. You get questions about whether I want my son or daughter to follow my path in West Point, which I've heard multiple times. Would I want and so you have to rip, root, and branch the politics and divisive policies out of these institutions and then focus them on creating and preparing actual future military leadership. West Point traditionally is focused on engineering, and rightfully so, because in our fighting forces across all services, we need the best and brightest minds in engineering, in addition to military studies. That's what I did at ROTC at Princeton, military science. And we need more uniformed members going back into West Point, the Air Force Academy, the Naval Academy, as a tour to teach with their wisdom of what they've learned in uniform, instead of just more civilian professors that came from the same left-wing woke universities that they left, and then try to push that into service academies. When that changes, Senator, I truly believe under Donald Trump, we will have a recruiting renaissance. That sends signals to the world, to our enemies and our allies alike, that America's back. And thankfully, then we have the men and women of our country willing to want to serve.
Thank you, and it's about attitude, too, and I love your attitude. You've got to be motivated. You've got to understand that people, they will hook up with you. They will understand and learn under their leaders. Why would you fight for a country that you don't love? That's what I keep hearing from a lot of our college kids that they're getting from these woke universities that they go to. Now, and I worked at a lot of them. That is one of the excuses I get from our kids. We've got to break that. Another one. According to the Pentagon, between 2001 and 2024, the number of civilian employees in the Office of the Secretary of Defense has nearly doubled from 1,500 to 3,000. Civilians on Joint Chiefs has increased from 191 to almost 1,000. Our military end strength goes down, our staff numbers are exploding. What are you going to do about that?
Senator, we're going to address that. We won World War II with 7 four-star generals. Today, we have 44 four-star generals. There's an inverse relationship between the size of staffs and victory on the battlefield. We don't need more bureaucracy at the top. We need more warfighters empowered at the bottom. So it's going to be my job, working with those that we hire and those inside the administration, to identify those places where fat can be cut so it can go toward lethality.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Exoff, welcome to this committee.
Thank you.
You know, we have far too much partisanship in our country right now. I think it's eating away at the fabric of what has always made this country great, about bringing people together from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of experiences. And we know that in our motto, together as one, we are strong. And so we in this committee, and certainly I speak for myself, but I think I speak for many of my colleagues, want to take partisanship out of this proceeding as much as we can. I'm not naive. It's out there. I get it. But we've got to try to take that out. And I want you to know that as a member of this committee, I have voted in a bipartisan way for secretaries of defense. I voted for 2 secretaries of defense when Donald Trump was previously president. We had those 2. We had, I think, 5 total secretaries of defense during that 4-year period. So we want to keep that in mind as to what we might see in this coming administration. But I voted, and we voted by a big margin for those folks as well. But part of that was the process, and having an opportunity to get to know the person and understand their qualifications and understand the standards. You know, I made repeated requests to meet with you prior to this meeting. I know many of my other colleagues also wanted to meet with you. I did that with the other nominees that I was happy to vote for. I thought they were highly qualified individuals and true professionals. And yet I could never get a meeting with you. Was there a reason you were afraid to have one-on-one meetings with some of my colleagues before the hearing?
Senator, I know there was a great deal of outreach to multiple offices. Schedules get full. There's a lot going on.
I was ready.
And I welcome the opportunity, pending
ready.
my schedule, to have an opportunity to sit down.
I was ready. It would have been so much better to have that opportunity to talk beforehand. I think that's a big mistake, and it doesn't set us on a good course when you refuse to meet with people and have a professional conversation about the huge challenges that we face at the Department of Defense. My colleagues, the folks who introduced you and others, the chairman has mentioned about the management of the DoD is a concern, cost overruns, delays on weapon systems. We need strong management at the Department of Defense, first and foremost. We've got to have someone who's going to grab the reins and give the taxpayers value for having the most lethal fighting force in the world that defends freedoms, but we've got to do it in an efficient way. I've heard about the jobs you've had in the past. Let's just talk about qualifications. I know you had 2 previous positions. How many people reported to you in those positions?
Senator, at Vets for Freedom, we were a small upstart. Our focus was
just the number,
working
please.
on Capitol Hill, going back to the battlefield
Just
to
the
support
number.
warfighters.
Just the number, please.
We probably had 8 to 10 full-time staff and lots of volunteers.
So you had 8. Has there been any other, we've heard about the 2, and certainly there's been a lot of talk about the mismanagement, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just curious, I won't go into that, just curious. So you had 8 there. What's the largest number of people you've ever supervised or had in an organization in your career?
Not 3 million, Senator.
No, I don't expect that. Very few people have ever had that experience, but how many? It's a straight up question.
I think we had over 100 full-time staff at Concerned Vets for America, roughly, with thousands of volunteers.
So 100 people.
I was also a headquarters company commander, which would have been
Okay, that's fine.
a couple of hundred. So
Couple-
nothing remotely near the size of the Defense Department,
Right.
I would acknowledge that.
Actually,
Senator.
not remotely near even a medium-sized company in America, let alone a big company in America, especially a major corporation. And we're hiring you to be the CEO of one of the most complex, largest organizations in the world. We're the board of directors here. I don't know of any corporate board of directors that would hire a CEO for a major company if they came and said, you know, I supervised 100 people before. They'd ask you, well, what kind of experiences you had? We need innovation. Can you give me an experience or your actual experience of driving innovation in an organization? Give me an example of where you have done
Oh,
that.
my goodness, Senator, absolutely. At Concerned Veterans for America, we created the Fixing Veterans Healthcare Task Force, a bipartisan task force that never been done before, to create policy, to drive policy change on Capitol Hill that organizations fought ferociously against. We got the VA Accountability Act passed and the Mission Act passed in a way that a nonprofit of our size, veterans organization, has never done. And
Thank you.
that's testified in all the letters that we
you.
put forward to the committee, which are on the record.
Okay, I have limited time. Thank you for that. Give me an example of where you've driven down cost. I've heard the examples that Senator Blumenthal gave. The cost was a real problem for you in your 50-person organization that you actually raised a lot less than what you actually spent. Did you drive costs down? If in a 50-person organization, let me tell you, we've got to drive costs down dramatically in an organization of 3 million people and hundreds of billions of dollars. You don't have that experience that you can talk about. To me, this is, or acquisition reform. Acquisition reform, you bring that up. Have you had experience in acquisition reform?
I've written about and studied on acquisition reform.
Have you
for quite
actually
some
done
time.
it?
Because what we need in the hands of our warfighters better change because we're not doing it well right now.
It better, and we need people who have experience actually doing that. You know, you talk about standards. Again, I'm going to go back to CEO of the most complex organization in the world. I don't think there's a board of directors in America that would hire you as a CEO with the kind of experience you have on your resume. You talk about standards. You talk about raising or lower, that we have a problem of standards in the DOD, and we have to raise standards for the men and women who serve. Do you think that the way to raise the minimum standards of the people who serve us is to lower the standards for the Secretary of Defense, that we have someone who has never managed an organization more than 100 people is going to come in and manage this incredibly important organization and do it with a professionalism and has no experience that they can tell us that they have actually done that? I have real problems with that. This is not about other issues that are brought up. They're all very important. I'm just about trying to get things done, managing efficiently, and having the best people who have demonstrated that in a large organization. And I'm sorry, but I don't see that in your background. There are a lot of other things you can do very well. You're a capable person, but you have not convinced me that you're able to take on this tremendous responsibility with a complex organization and having little or no significant management experience.
Senator, I'm grateful to be hired by one of the most successful CEOs in American history, should I be confirmed.
Mr. Hegseth, it seems to me that you've supervised far more people than the average United States senator supervises typically. And
Except for former governors, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Mullen, I understand you are yielding back your time and do not wish to ask questions. I was misinformed. Senator Mullen,
okay.
it's right.
Caught me totally off guard there. I'd like to submit for the record signatures by 32 members of the House of Representatives who are veterans. The signatures call on the Senate to honor the constitutional duty of advise and consent by conducting a fair, thorough confirmation process that evaluates his nomination solely on the substance and merits. His distinguished military service, academic credentials, and a bold vision for revitalizing the national defense. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record.
Without objection.
You know, there's a lot of talk going about, talking about qualifications and then about us hiring him if we are the board, but there's a lot of senators here I wouldn't have on my board because there is no qualifications except your age, and you got to be living in the state and you're a citizen of the United States to be a senator. Other than the fact we got to convince a lot of people to vote for us. And then when we start talking about qualifications, for if you're qualified for it, could the chairman tell me what the qualifications are for the Secretary of Defense? Mr. Chairman, could you tell me what the qualifications are for the Secretary of Defense?
I'd be happy for,
I'll read it.
for you to do
Yeah,
that. yeah.
Let me read it for you, because I Googled
I
it.
was getting some advice from
I
my
understand
second
that.
in command.
Yeah, but I'm just making a point, because there's a lot about qualifications, and I think it's so hypocritical of senators, especially on the other side of the aisle, be talking about his qualifications, not being able to lead the secretary, or be the Secretary of Defense, and yet your qualifications aren't any better. You guys aren't any more qualified to be the senator than I'm qualified to be the senator, except we're lucky enough to be here. But let me read you what the qualifications of the Secretary of Defense is, because I Googled it, and went through a lot of different sites, and really it's hard to see. But in general, the U.S. Secretary of Defense position is filled by a civilian. That's it. If you have served in the U.S. Army Forces and have been in the service for, you have to be retired for at least 7 years, and Congress can weigh that. And then there's questions that the senator from Massachusetts brought up about serving on a board inside the military industry, and yet your own secretary that you all voted for, Secretary of Austin, we had to vote on a waiver because he stepped off the board of Raytheon. But I guess that's okay, because that's a Democrat Secretary of Defense. But you so quickly forget about that. And then Senator Kaine, or I guess I better use the senator from Virginia, starts bringing up the fact that what if you showed up drunk to your job? How many senators have showed up drunk to vote at night? Have any of you guys asked them to step down and resign from their job? And don't tell me you haven't seen it, because I know you have. And then how many senators do you know have got a divorce before cheating on their wives? Did you ask them to step down? No. But it's for show. You guys make sure you make a big show and point out the hypocrisy because the man's made a mistake. And you want to sit there and say that he's not qualified? Give me a joke. I mean, it is so ridiculous that you guys hold yourself as this higher standard and you forget you got a big plank in your eye. We've all made mistakes. I've made mistakes. And Jennifer, thank you for loving him through that mistake. Because the only reason why I'm here and not in prison is because my wife loved me too. I have changed, but I'm not perfect. But I found somebody that thought I was perfect. And for whatever reason, you love Pete, and I don't know why. But just like our Lord and Savior forgave me, my wife's had to forgive me more than once too, and I'm sure you've had to forgive him too. And so thank you. So before I go down this rabbit hole again, tell me something about your wife that you love.
She's the smartest, most capable, loving, humble, honest person I've ever met. In addition to being incredibly beautiful.
Don't forget about your kids.
I'm supposed to talk about my kids?
No, well, she's also the mother.
Oh, an amazing mother.
Yes.
Of our blended family of 7 kids.
Brother, I'm
all
pulling
of
you
which
as
love
long.
her.
I'm trying to help you here. You know, do you believe that you're going to be running the Secretary or the Department of Defense by yourself?
Senator, absolutely not. Just as President Trump is assembling his cabinet, I look forward and already am in the process of building one of the best possible teams you can imagine, with decades and decades of experience outside of the Pentagon, driving innovation and excellence, and also inside the building, knowing how to make it happen. Yes, sir.
So, in your organizations that you did have the privilege of running, did you have a board that you?
In both organizations, we had a board, yes.
Okay, and what did you do with that board? What kind of decisions did you make with them?
Those boards provided oversight and insight into decision-making.
They all have special, unique sets that maybe filled gaps that you're not the expertise in?
Yes, sir.
So do you believe you're capable of surrounding yourself with capable individuals that you're going to be able to run those same ideas by, and surround yourself with people that are smarter and better equipped in maybe areas that you don't necessarily carry those expertise with?
Senator, the only reason I've had success in life, to include my wonderful wife, is because of people more capable around me and having the self-confidence to empower them and say, hey, run with the ball, run with the football, take it down the field. We'll do this together. I don't care who gets the credit. And in this case, that's how the Pentagon will be run.
Let's end with this, Mr. Chairman, about the qualifications. You got a man who has literally put his butt on the line, who served 20 years in the service, multiple deployments, has heard the bullets crack over the top of his head, has been willing to go into combat, been willing to see friends die for this country. And he's willing to still put himself through this. His wife is willing to still stand beside him, knowing he wasn't perfect, knowing that all this was going to be brought up, and he's still willing to serve the country. What other qualifications does he need? That I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Mullen. Senator Duckworth. And again, we really are going to strictly enforce the rule about no demonstrations or noise. The distinguished ranking member.
Just a point of personal privilege to make a correction. The reason that General Austin required a waiver was not because of his participation in a corporate enterprise. It was because he did not have 7 years of interruption between his service and his appointment. Second point is that if any of us were appointed as Secretary of Defense, we would be subject to the same types of questions. And the case in point is Senator John Tower was nominated for Secretary of Defense. It was discovered by his colleagues that his behavior was not commensurate with the responsibilities despite his service, and he was voted down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Duckworth, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And also, Secretary Mattis had to have this waiver as well. Mr. Hegseth, this hearing is about whether you are qualified to be Secretary of Defense, and one of the qualifications, to answer my colleague's question, is to actually win the votes of every member of this committee and to be confirmed by the United States Senate. And you need to convince us that you're worthy of that vote, because the people of the state of Illinois voted for me to be their senator so that I could cast that vote when it comes to picking who is going to be the next Secretary of Defense. This hearing now seems to be a hearing about whether or not women are qualified to serve in combat, and not about whether or not you are qualified to be Secretary of Defense. And let me just say that the American people need a SecDef who's ready to lead on day one. You are not that person. Our adversaries watch closely during times of transition, and any sense that the Department of Defense that keeps us safe is being steered by someone who's wholly unprepared for the job puts America at risk, and I am not willing to do that. With that in mind, Mr. Hegseth, I want you to try to explain to the American people, this committee, who have to vote for you, and to our troops who are deployed around the world, why you are qualified to lead the Department of Defense. We already know that you've only led as large as a 200-person organization. We already know that you so badly mangled a budget that after you left, they had to bring in a forensic accountant to figure out what went wrong, and that the largest budget you ever managed was about $18 billion. You know, that is about 51,560 times lower than the Department of Defense budget of $825 billion. $16 million is 51,568 times smaller than the defense budget. Please describe to me, Mr. Hegseth, you talk about DOD passing an audit. Please describe to me a time or an organization when that you led underwent an audit, because you say you're going to hire smarter people than you to run this audit. I'm not asking you to be an accountant. I want you to be able to tell me what kind of guidance will be given to those employees, what will happen whether or not you pass that audit. Have you led an audit of any organization, yes or no? I don't want a long answer, yes or no. Have you led an audit of any organization of which you were in charge?
Senator, in both of the organizations I ran, we were always completely fiscally responsible.
Yes or no, did you lead an audit?
And the way my leadership has been stated,
yes or no?
has been completely
What are you afraid of? You
mischaracterized.
can't answer this question. Yes or no, did you lead an audit? Do you not know this answer?
Senator,
Yes
every
or
part
no?
of my leadership
Yes
of these
or no?
organizations
Yes
has
or
been
no, did you lead an audit?
misrepresented
I will
from
take
top
that
to
as a no.
bottom.
What were the findings? So there were no findings because you've never led an audit. What guidance did you give the auditors? None, because you've never led an audit. Nobody expects you to be an accountant, Mr. Hegseth. What we expect is for you to understand the complexity of this Pentagon budget process that is absolutely necessary to outfit our warfighters. Look, the Secretary of Defense is required to make quick decisions every single day that, well, with high-level information that's being provided for them. A Secretary of Defense has to have breadth and depth of knowledge. Right now, I am concerned that you have neither. Mr. Hexeth, what is the highest level of international negotiations that you have engaged in, that you have led in? Because the Secretary of Defense does lead international security negotiations. There are three main ones that the Secretary of Defense leads and signs. Can you name at least one of them?
Could you repeat the question, Senator?
Sure. What is the highest level of international security agreement that you have led? And can you name some that the Secretary of Defense would lead? There's three main ones. Do you know?
I have not been involved in international security arrangements because I have not been in government other
Okay.
than serving in the military. So my job has been
So
to
no, the
lead
answer is,
men
can
and
you
women in
name one of the
combat.
three main ones that the
You're
Secretary
talking
of
about
Defense
defense
signs?
arrangements. I mean, NATO might be one that you're referring to.
Status of Forces Agreement would be one of them.
Status of forces agreement. I've been a part of teaching
So-
about status of forces agreements.
But you don't
inside
remember to mention
Afghanistan.
it? You're not qualified, Mr. Hexeth. You're not qualified. You talk about repairing our defense industrial complex. You're not qualified to that. You could do acquisition and cross-servicing agreements, which essentially are security agreements. You can't even mention that. You've done none of those. You talked about the Indo-Pacific a little bit, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. Can you name the importance of at least one of the nations in the ASEAN, and what type of agreement we have with at least one of those nations? And how many nations are in ASEAN, by the way?
I couldn't tell you the exact
No, you
amount of
couldn't,
nations in
because you've
that,
not
but I
even
know we have
bothered to
allies
do-
in South Korea and Japan and in AUKUS with Australia, trying to work
Okay.
on submarines with them. and
Mr.
data
Hexeth,
transfers
none
with
of those
them.
countries
We
are
have
in
allies
ASEAN.
across.
None of those three countries that you've mentioned are in ASEAN. I suggest you do a little homework before you prepare for these types of negotiations. Listen, Mr. Hexeth, we ask our troops to go into harm's way all the time. We ask them to go into harm's way. And this behind me is a copy of the Soldier's Creed, a copy that usually hangs over my desk here in the Senate, and you should be familiar with it. It's the same copy that hung over my desk at Walter Reed every single day that I woke up and fought my way back because I wanted to go back and serve next to my buddies who saved my life. This same copy, these words are repeated over and over and over again. And let me read out two things to you, two sentences. I will always place the mission first, and I am disciplined, physically and mentally tough, trained and proficient in my warrior task. Mr. Hexeth, our troops follow these words every single day, and they man up and they pack their rucksacks and they go to war. And they deserve a leader who can lead them, not a leader who wants to lower the standards for himself or raising the standards for other people. And by the way, our troops already meet the standards. We ask troops to man that ship, fight that fire, fly that helicopter until their very last breath. And they do that every single day. They cannot be led by someone who's not competent to do the job. How can we ask these warriors to train and perform the absolute highest standards when you are asking us to lower the standards to make you the Secretary of Defense simply because you are buddies with our president-elect? And by the way, he has filed for bankruptcy 6 times. I'm not quite sure he's the kind of CEO you want to refer to as a successful businessman. Let me make it clear. You can't seem to grasp that there is no U.S. military as we know it without the incredible women that we serve. Women who've earned their place in their units. You have not earned your place as Secretary of Defense. You say you care about keeping our armed forces strong and that you like that our armed forces are meritocracy, then let's not lower the standards for you. You, sir, are a no-go at this station.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. I would like to submit for the record a letter submitted by Mr. Brian Marriott that says anyone who would claim that Pete mismanaged funds at Vets for Freedom is ignorant of the facts. Without objection, it will be admitted to the record. Senator Budd.
Thank you, Chairman Wicker, and congrats on your chairmanship of this committee. I want to thank you for your leadership and your handling of this today. I think you're doing a great job. So I want to also submit for the record a letter submitted by Mr. Daniel Catlin, the former operations manager at Vets for Freedom. Mr. Catlin's letter states that Mr. Hegseth and Mr. Catlin conducted weekly meetings to meticulously review every dollar that the organization spent. Pete's hands-on approach and dedication to financial responsibility ensured that Vets for Freedom operated within its budget. Mr. Catlin's letters also states that Pete treated his staff with the utmost respect, regardless of race or gender. So I ask unanimous consent to enter this into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Hegseth, congratulations on your nomination. Thanks for appearing before the committee today. I enjoyed meeting you in my office before Christmas, and I've enjoyed our friendship before that. You know, you stated in your advanced policy questions that the American people need to be informed, engaged, and inspired to join our military. I wholeheartedly agree with that. We also have a problem, though, with obesity and falling academic standards. It's very concerning. We've talked about that before. So if confirmed, how would you approach increasing the number of Americans eligible to serve in the military, but without lowering standards?
Well, Senator, I think there are already, to the credit of, I believe, the Army and other services have now caught up to that, which have piloted programs that have had some success, that have allowed young Americans who want to serve in the military but can't necessarily pass the ASVAB or pass the APFT to get into basic training, an opportunity to get caught up, a preparatory class. Sure. Unfortunately, yes, we do have a problem of obesity in our country, not necessarily something that if I'm confirmed, Secretary of Defense is able to address. But I do think leading from the front matters. I do think having a Secretary of Defense that will go out and do PT with the troops matters, that has been out there and done that before. And hopefully that's a motivating factor for young people. But the reality of obesity and criminal backgrounds and medical problems have long been an issue of recruitment in America, unfortunately. What changed is the perception of military service because of the condition of the services, and frankly, because of, in some ways, the way our schools don't teach young people to love the country anymore. And if you don't love the country, why do you want to serve that country? That's a deeper problem. But all of those things need to be addressed to revive recruiting, and obesity is certainly a part of it.
Thank you for that. So I've had multiple conversations, young folks back in North Carolina, young men, young women, and we get to meet a lot of them. But, you know, I hear from some of these folks who I encourage to join the military. They say that they're concerned that it's become politicized. And if confirmed, would you commit to working with my office to address the military recruiting crisis and ensuring the military is focused on warfighting?
Senator, absolutely. Number one, from day one, with a mandate from the Commander-in-Chief, who received that mandate when Americans spoke out loudly and said, we want peace through strength, we want America first foreign policy, and we don't want political ideology driving decisions inside our Defense Department. That was clear. It's an infection that the American people are acutely aware of, which the men and women in this room have lived firsthand. I've lived it firsthand. And that's why it will be a priority. And I truly believe, and I'm humbled by this, the response we've already seen from young men and women who've decided to join the military when they had said, I wasn't going to. But seeing a Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump, reassured them. Seeing the possibility, if confirmed, of a Secretary of Defense that would have their back reassured them. And so in the first couple of months after President Trump's election, we have already seen, the numbers are there, a recruiting surge in all the services that I would welcome the opportunity to continue. And it's humbling to think that families across this country would have confidence in us to deliver for their young men and women. There's no more important task.
Thank you for that. So shifting gears a bit, I want to hear some of your thoughts on the growing fighter aircraft capacity gap with China and what this means for a potential fight in the Indo-Pacific. So if confirmed, what policy recommendations will you make to the President on procurement and maintenance of 4th and 5th generation fighters while we continue to research and develop 6th generation and collaborative combat aircraft?
Senator, that's a very important conversation, one that I've been looking at a great deal. A lot of it, just to be clear, involves classifications and understanding precisely cost and capabilities, including capabilities of enemy systems, both not just 4th and 5th, but potential 6th generation, which we've already seen a prototype released from the Chinese. That's a dangerous development, considering at least the publicly understood condition of NGAD, which I look forward to the opportunity to looking underneath the hood on that. But ensuring 4th and 5th are capable and upgraded as necessary, will be a part of our contingency. But when you look at what's happening in the Indo-Pacific, say operability, range is going to matter because it's such a large battle space. That will all factor in decisions that are made. And that's where I feel, frankly, a little bit liberated, is that I didn't work at Lockheed or any number of, pick a defense contractor. I didn't mean to point one out in particular. Pick any. I haven't. I don't have a special interest in any particular system or any particular company or any particular narrative. I want to know what works. I want to know what defeats our enemies, what keeps us safe, what deters them, what keeps our enemies up at night. Whatever that is, I want more of it, and I want to invest in it. And I know that's the view that President Trump has as well.
Thank you. You know, some have commented recently about the need to eliminate immediately a manned aircraft. So I'd say maybe one day, but that day's not now, and certainly not before 2027, especially in the Indo-Pacific. So if confirmed, will you commit to work with my office in this committee to ensure the proper mix of fighters, manned and unmanned?
I look forward to working with you on that, Senator, because unmanned will be a very important part of the way future wars are fought. Just the idea of survivability for a human being drives cost and time in ways that unmanned systems do not. But I look forward to that conversation. Senator.
Thank you, Senator Budd. I now recognize Senator